Welcome back, whiners. My name's Amanda Lopez, and you're joining me on the Wine About Data podcast. Today, I am so excited because I'm joined by a special guest, Mandy. Mandy, please introduce yourself. Tell our whiners a little bit about you and your experience in the nonprofit industry.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, thank you for having me today, Amanda. I really appreciate it. So, I'm a program officer at AWS Foundation. I've been at AWS Foundation for the last 4 years.
Wow.
Made that transition from nonprofit work. So, I spent 14 years in nonprofit work prior to joining the team. And it really started in my communications major at University of Cincinnati. There were so many different ways you could go with that degree.
Yes.
And my advisor said, I think you do really well in nonprofit work. And I really just didn't have a good idea of what that looked like. So started out at University of Cincinnati Foundation, worked there for 5 years, and then worked for several nonprofits in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Fort Wayne, Indiana before joining the team at AWS Foundation.
Well, I am so excited to have you on this podcast, Mandy, because you just bring a wealth of experience, both in that like direct service experience and then also as a foundation. So I know that there's a lot we can tap into and sharing your great wisdom today with our whiners. But before we get into that, what are we drinking today?
We're drinking LaCroix, a blackberry LaCroix. So love the bubbles. And
I know. I feel like if you want something that's just refreshing, but you need a little flavor, a sparkling water, which there's so many of right now, is a great way to do that. And we always say, fill up your cup with whatever you want to drink. It doesn't have to be a wine. And so cheers, Mandy.
Cheers.
Let's give it a try.
It's refreshing.
Yeah, you get a little bit of that black raspberry.
Yeah, it's not too overpowering.
Nope, good choice.
Thanks.
Well, today we're going to talk a little bit more about foundation specifically. So kind of putting on your hat today and your work in the foundation sector, and how can foundations support nonprofits capacity when it comes to data, right? I'm so excited to really talk about this. Obviously you as a foundation program officer, you interact with a lot of nonprofits. And so you get to see a whole gamut of nonprofits.
Yeah.
And what do you see as some of the common challenges or pitfalls that nonprofits have when it comes to data?
I was thinking a lot about the different nonprofits that we work with, and we work with so many from, a one-person team or a volunteer-led organization all the way up to those multi-million-dollar organizations. And I think something that happens within nonprofits that's really common is there's so much work that has to be done, and they're so invested in the mission and serving the individuals that they're set out to do so, that sometimes they can lose sight of what they're actually measuring and what they need to be measuring.
Yeah.
So I think that it's really important for nonprofits to look back at their overall mission and what that strategic plan might be, and if they have a strategic plan, and identify how is it that they are demonstrating impact? What is it that they are actually measuring within their programs, and really going back to that high level before they dive into the actual details of how they're measuring and what that looks like.
Yeah. That is so good, because I mean, we see that often so many times, and rightly so, like the nonprofit staff are committed, and they do have urgent needs that they're seeing with the clients that they're serving. And so it can be overwhelming to just try to meet those needs on the day to day. And so to take that time to step back and remind ourselves, okay, let's just not keep, spinning the hamster wheel, so to speak, right? But then to really be like, okay, are we moving forward?
Yeah. And I think taking that time to pause and evaluate what it is that they're measuring. But I think also working with the board to make sure the board has an understanding of why this is so important for a nonprofit to take a little bit of a pause and identify these are our strategic goals, and this is how we are actually going to measure the impact that we're making.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, so it sounds like, some of those common pitfalls and challenges are they're just focusing on the day-to-day, providing those good services, maybe not having the time or prioritizing, engaging their leadership, like the board.
Right, yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, I would say too, being on the foundation side, we see a lot of output versus outcome.
Yeah.
So, we have 50 people coming to our program, which is so important. We need to know how many people are attending and what that looks like. But what are those individuals taking away from that program? How is it impacting their lives? And then how does that tie directly into your overall mission?
Yeah, I agree. And I know we use some jargony language there.
Yes.
So we'll drop some links in the show notes if you're like, what does output versus outcome actually mean? But I think we work in the human business, basically, when you're in a nonprofit, right? In this, mission focused environment, it's hard to quote unquote measure humans.
Right.
we're interesting and unique and diverse, and
Mhm.
how do we control that? So it
Mhm.
makes sense that it's easier to count like the touches and the reach,
Right,
right?
right.
Like
Yeah.
how many did we tutor? How many
Mhm.
people came to our center or our
Yeah.
program,
Yeah.
right? Instead of thinking about, okay, now, so what? Like what
Mhm.
change,
Mhm. Absolutely.
happened?
Yeah. And then we have, working in our space with focused on providing grants to nonprofits that serve individuals with intellectual, developmental, and physical disabilities. There are lots of different kinds of disabilities. And so
Mm,
each organization, each program will have a different measurement. That it's hard to tie it all up into one. It's really looking at what
yes.
does that individual's life look like and what does
Right.
that change within their life. And it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. I can see how that's also a really big challenge that nonprofits have.
Hmm.
Is figuring out what are those right tools and
Absolutely.
resources that, are appropriate for that individual, but then also for the collective
Hmm.
across their program,
Yeah.
And the whole
Hmm.
organization.
Yeah, there's an organization I worked at before, and we provided tutoring to individuals, and it was dependent on each individual what progress they made, and how
Right.
do you tie that up into a broader story to share with the community. So it's looking at what that progress looked like overall, and so that was
Hmm.
always a challenge for that organization.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what do you think is a role or ways that foundations can really help support
Mhm.
nonprofits' capacity when it comes to data?
So I think we have, with that broader picture, that we can see some of the challenges that are happening across nonprofits. We have the opportunity to provide training resources based off of those issues that
Mm,
we see. So
yeah.
providing opportunities to learn more about data, learn more about how to implement a strategic plan, learn more about how they're evaluating and measuring the information that they need to collect. So I think training is a huge part. Also, I think we're also conveners. So bringing
Yes.
organizations together and have
Mm,
conversations about what's working well for one organization,
hmm.
and giving them the opportunity to learn from one another. I think that's really beneficial as well. Then we also do some capacity building grants as well. So that could be
Mm.
strategic planning, that could be some board work, whatever that might be that the nonprofit needs.
I love that because I think so often a nonprofit might look at a foundation as just providing a grant, but you're really a partner. I
Absolutely.
mean,
Yeah.
most often, and I know especially at AWS Foundation, you really want to partner with your nonprofits to
Hmm.
see them do the best that they can to meet the
Hmm.
need and have the greatest impact in the
Yeah.
community.
That's one of my favorite parts about my role is I love it when people call when there's a challenge, when they
Mm,
are trying to figure something out and they're looking for resources. Do we know a consultant? Do we have data or research
yeah,
on a certain topic? And we really walk alongside our grantees to help connect them with resources that they might need that go beyond funding. Of course, there's
right.
always the grant piece that if they
Yes.
need support, we'll certainly talk through that and
Hmm.
determine if that's something our board would support. But that piece of transparency and having conversations in tough times and tough moments is one of
Yes.
my favorite parts about the role.
That's great. And I think that really shows that you've built a great relationship and trust
Mhm.
because it can take a lot, and as
Yeah.
you know, wearing that other hat of
Yeah.
being a nonprofit,
Mhm.
reaching out to a foundation and saying, "Hey, I need help."
Mhm.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
a pretty brave ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just something that is unique to AWS Foundation. Not all foundations operate that way, and they certainly have their reasons for the way they operate, but I think it
Yeah.
can be unique to AWS Foundation.
Hmm. So let's just kind of unpack this a little bit more of what are some of the different ways that foundations can help. So you talked about doing
Mhm.
trainings, talked about capacity
Yeah.
building grants.
Training, capacity building grants, but then also connecting our nonprofits with other resources, whether that be data
Mm,
or research. Maybe there's another organization in our region who has went through something similar, or maybe
yeah,
they're
a
trying to come up with
peer.
the data plan. So really being a connector and a convener as well.
Yeah, I love that, being that connector and that convener because you have such a broad partnership
Hmm.
across the community, both with other funders
Hmm.
in the community. And like you said, there's a whole range of nonprofits you come across,
Hmm.
the small size ones
Yeah.
to those like multi-million dollar ones. And they're
Yeah.
all resourced differently
Right.
and
Hmm.
have different needs across that continuum as it comes to data.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
When you think about, expanding those partnerships with nonprofits and helping support the capacity, what are some of the changes or progress that you've seen happen?
We've provided some strategic planning grants, and so giving our nonprofits the opportunity to work with a consultant who can look at their overall mission and their overall impact and
Mm,
work directly with the staff and board. That's been really
yeah.
impactful to see some of those changes in nonprofits who haven't had that time to dedicate to that or the
Mhm,
resources to
mhm.
dedicate. So I think we've seen some growth in those organizations who've taken that time and who've received some of those grants.
That's really exciting and such a great treasure that you provided to them, because a lot of nonprofits are doing that strategic plan on their own because they don't always have the resources of either the time or the capacity to hire that out. And so for them to be able to have, a consultant come in, a third party person, so then everybody can be involved, that can really build so much synergy between the staff and the board.
Yeah.
And now they hopefully have this clear roadmap for the future.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about some of our grantees who've looked across the country at what other ideas are working and have brought some of those ideas to Northeast Indiana. That's been really impactful in some of their planning and some of their research to be able to bring new ideas that will impact people with disabilities in a new way.
Yeah. And that's another great thing of data. It's finding out, what's working out there. Like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
Right. And so, for them to have the capacity to go and kind of, what we call like benchmarking,
Absolutely.
aspirational, organizations and peer communities to be able to bring that back and replicate to expand their impact.
Yeah.
Are there any other, tips or suggestions that you would have for nonprofits and what they need to do to build their capacity?
I think to the nonprofits that we serve, just really encouraging them to reach out when they might be at a point where they have questions or they're at a challenge. I think when they're trying to figure it out on their own, sometimes they don't realize there are people out there who want to help beyond funding. And so I really encourage them to get connected with the foundation or other peers in the community and reach out for those pieces where they might need some help.
I love that. Thanks so much, Mandy.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot today.
Yeah.
And if we were to give our listeners kind of one thing, like where would you say, like, where to start for a nonprofit when they want to build their data capacity?
I would start by looking at your overall mission and those ways that you're implementing that mission. Start there. I think when we're in the day-to-day and looking at those services we're providing on a daily basis, what is the overall impact to those individuals that we're trying to see? And then figure out how we're going to measure that impact overall.
Yeah, I love that. So really kind of take that time to step back, pause, reflect, and see where the alignment is of like your overall why.
Right.
At your organization.
Yeah. I think the why can get lost from time to time. It doesn't mean that we're not providing good services. We're not serving those that we intend to do so, but sometimes that why gets a little lost.
Absolutely. I think that's so simple, but can be very powerful for an organization and a leader. Well, Winers, thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to link some of these resources that I mentioned, like outputs versus outcomes, and some actually things on strategic planning, because I feel like that's a really important component as it relates to data, in our show notes. And if you haven't yet, make sure to follow us at transformconsultinggroup.com on our website. You can sign up to join our newsletter or on social media. And if you haven't, and if you like our podcast, give us a 5-star rating. Well, cheers, Mandy. Thanks for all the great things you're doing.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for the LaCroix.
Absolutely.